James Nelson Novoa is currently an ERC Research Fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he will speak now on the Nação as a political entity at the core.
The presentation
and I will try to, I will be able to control.
Who has disappeared once again, as he seems to be wont to do during this conference. I know that he's been involved with this for months and months and months. He even had to change the date. I want to thank him for having brought together so congenial, friendly, and wise a group of people to speak about these matters, from whom I'm learning a great deal. Now, I wanted to speak about just one aspect of what we could say, or one of the faces of the new Christians, in this case, in Rome. I'm not by any means saying this was the only way that they represented themselves, but this is one of the ways I've chosen to One of the ways in which the new Christians of Portugal came of age and became to constitute a political reality, present in Rome, in the deliberations of the Curia, and indeed in the daily business of the Pope himself, was through the existence in Rome of a group of individuals who claimed to be there as representatives of the Conversos, as their veritable agents, there to defend them against the machinations of the tribunal of the Inquisition. In part, through the very existence of these individuals, the new Christians became, at different intervals, the subject of discussion and debate in the midst of the daily business of the court of Rome. That there were actual, real conversos living there and ostensibly recognized as a quasi-diplomatic group gave to the new Christians of Portugal a quasi-national status, in a similar way to the other national or ethnic groups which were accorded such a status in Rome. The form the collective representation took, in part, was dictated by the ways in which similar groups went about being present in Rome. Through their ability to capitalize on the idea of their belonging to a distinct community, in spite of manifold divisions and dissensions, they were able to help to make of the Nação a veritable political entity, recognized in Rome and beyond. Nation being, of course, and we must not forget, the category by which initially student and merchant groups obtained legitimacy in medieval and modern, early modern Europe in foreign settings. And this is exactly what happened in Rome with them. The story of this veritable new Christian lobby and its effects on the diplomatic tug-of-war between the courts of Portugal and Rome during the crucial years of the establishment of the Inquisition has, of course, been masterfully told by Alexandre Herculano. In his Historia da Origem e Estabelecimento da Inquisição em Portugal, the Portuguese historian brought to the attention of his 19th century readers the individuals who had languished in the obscurity of Vatican and Portuguese archives. He related the story of a concerted and collective effort on the part of new Christians, both in Portugal and in Rome, who attempted and at times managed to tip the balance in the struggle to erect a Spanish-style tribunal of the Inquisition in Portugal between the critical years of 1531 and 1547. Ultimately, of course, as we know, these efforts were in vain, and the designs of the Portuguese crown prevailed, but not before the new Christians managed to make of themselves a standard reference in Rome for the duration and also in the fateful years ahead and beyond. Herculano, of course, was interested in their role in the larger picture of the creation and development of the tribunal in Portugal, and it was to that end that he fleshed out the stories and the episodes of the individuals involved in the machinations of the Nação in Rome. By comparing Portuguese Converso efforts in the court of Rome to similar efforts on the part of other agents who represented individual and collective interests, the activities of the individuals studied by Herculano, the strategies and ways of operating, can perhaps better be understood. As will be seen, they were similar to other procurators who worked in favor of national or paranational groups over the centuries to obtain advantages from them in their home countries. A storied category of people well known within the court of Rome and the Roman Curia. At the same time, they contributed to bringing the new Christian Nação to the forefront of papal policy and of making the Christaus Novus a standard fixture in Rome. The presence of Portuguese New Christian agents in Rome was officially sanctioned in 1535, when, on July 20th of that year, a papal brief was made out by Paul III that stipulated that the new Christians of Portugal could have representatives there and elsewhere, that vied for their interests and defended them against the accusations that were waged against them by the tribunal of the Inquisition that had been created in 1531. The papal document defined the people involved as originally Portuguese Jews who, under King Manuel, had been converted to Christianity, ad fidem Christi conversi fuerunt, and that lived as Christians. It noted that some were Judaizers or apostates, judaizantes aut alias a fide catholica apostatantes, and that had been accused of crimes against the faith. The brief makes provisions for individuals offering advice and assistance, consilium, auxilium, vel favorem, even by family members, spouses, and friends. Be they of either sex, and be they either clerics or lay people, who could defend them in Portugal or even in the Roman Curia. In treating three Italian cardinals, Giovanni Domenico de Cupis, the Archbishop of Trani, Girolamo Ginucci, the last Bishop of Worcester and the Bishop of Malta, and Giacomo Simonetta, the Bishop of Pesaro, to make sure that this status, the terms of this status would be recognized and that this brief would be applied. The wording of the papal document made of the Christaus Novus then, similar to that, gave them a status that was similar to that of many other national groups that operated in the court of Rome. The cardinals chosen by Paul III themselves were no strangers to the new Christian cause. Both Ginucci and Simonetta were known sympathizers of the Christaus Novus. They had both been promoted to the cardinalate on May 21st of that year, in part as a reward for recognition of their work on the Portuguese New Christian issue. Paul III, elected on October the 13th, 1534, had inherited the new Christian conundrum from his predecessor, Clement VII, who had first granted the tribunal to King João III on December 17th, 1531. Both men, accomplished jurists, held important curial positions. Ginucci was the Auditor General of the Apostolic Chamber, Simonetta an auditor of the Tribunal of the Sacred Rota. Both had been consulted by the Pope on the question of the publication in Portugal of Pope Clement VII's brief, Sempiterno Regi, of April the 7th, 1533, which granted the new Christians of Portugal a general absolution of their sins, a pardon, the publication of which had been reiterated by the Medici Pope at least 6 times before his death on September the 25th, 1534, being favorable to its dissemination in Portugal. Paul's request for legal consultations were in keeping with his predecessor's search for a definitive solution to the problem posed by the very existence of the new Christians. Clement VII had summoned one of the most important legal minds, professor of civil and canon law from the University of Bologna, Pier Paolo Parisio, a man we met yesterday in Ken's presentation, which resulted in the legal consultations of the matter contained in the Consilia, published in Bologna for the first time in 1533, that came out squarely against the legitimacy of the forced conversion of 1497. The consultation was fundamental for the drafting of Sempiterno Regio, as it put into question a sacrament imposed by force, as we have seen in detail. It was to be one of the new Christians' chief defense against the designs of the Portuguese king, and their most powerful argument, which worked against the foundations of the tribunal in Portugal during the crucial years of the activity of the tribunal. Both the Concilia and the machinations in favor of the promulgation of Sempiterno Regi could be linked in some way to the efforts of the individuals evoked by Herculano, one of the individuals concretely, the infamous new Christian member of the Order of Christ, Duarte de Paz. In circumstances which remain unclear, Paz made his way to Rome around 1532 and there claimed he had taken the mission of defending the new Christian cause upon himself. His veritable links to real Christian Converso networks and efforts based in Portugal are still murky at best. He has been linked by at least two archival sources to the preparation of the Concilia, payment for the preparation of the Concilia, the declaration of a Portuguese servant in an inquisitorial investigation from 1542, and the private correspondence of a new Christian merchant living in Rome, also dated from around that year. Both accounts spoke of a certain sum of money given for the preparation of legal consultations and owed to a certain lawyer from Bologna. It couldn't have been any other than our man Parisio. Paz was active in Rome until 1538, crucial years for the Inquisition and for the new Christians in Portugal, during which his influence as a man intimately aware of the machinations of the papal court was abundantly clear. Paz embodied the kind of representation which is spelled out in the brief of July 1535. He did ostensibly offer advice and represent individuals persecuted by the Inquisition back in Portugal. Whether his mandate came from a concerted decision made by new Christians in Portugal or was something he wholly assumed for himself, nonetheless, Paz and others of his kind who claimed the status of new Christian agents helped to give themselves in the Nação a veritable political dimension, garnering social capital and making of new Christians a standard reference. The procuratore, or officially sanctioned representative who could represent another to defend his or her property and legal rights, was enshrined in civil and canon law. Throughout the Middle Ages, corporate representation meant that groups and communities could be represented by such agents in European courts, were given the plena potestas to represent them in lawsuits and in defending their interests to obtain some kind of benefit. The court of the Pope, at once that of the ruler of a state and the seat of the Catholic Church, was no exception. In the case of Rome, these procuratores could represent the interests of the different naciones which were recognized by the Pope. They were not full-fledged diplomats, but served to obtain particular benefits and advantages. Most of these agents or procurators, were curial officials for whom the role of procurator ran parallel to that of pursuing a curial career with a solid background in canon and civil law. Because of their intimate knowledge of the sinewy world of curial circles, and at times linked to the tribunals of the Rota or the penitentiary, they were better able to serve their patrons who sought ecclesiastical benefices than dispensations of various kinds for individuals, religious orders, dioceses, and cathedral chapters who could not make it to Rome. Many of these procuratores were intent on staying in Rome and making inroads into the curia, while others saw Rome as a place to consolidate themselves in their home countries, where they could retire to eventually. By the 15th century, there was a substantial number of such procuratores, especially from Germanic lands, and Spain, living in Rome and representing the interests of people from their place of origin. The Portuguese New Christians who were present in Rome and had availed themselves of this kind of status spelled out in the brief of July 1535 functioned in a way akin to these procuratores. They were provided the framework within which they could operate in a way similar to them, those that had existed and thrived in Rome for centuries. They too were able to represent people unable to go to Rome, namely members of the New Christians, Nação, accused by the newly created tribunal. And though the term nazione does not appear in the brief, the wording of the document is such that they were conceived of in a kind of quasi-national way, similar to the way procuratores represented other similar national groups. In this case, they were not chiefly ecclesiastics, as had been most of the people represented by the curial procuratores in the past, but a distinct group which had been brought to the forefront of the business of the papal court and curial bureaucracy. A precedent for such a situation is to be found in the case of the Spanish conversos, who, upon the heels of the creation of the tribunal in Spain in 1478, granted by Pope Sixtus IV, sent agents to Spain to represent their cases after they had been accused of apostasy. It is an episode which has been much evoked by scholars of the Spanish Inquisition, but yet has not been studied systematically. Sixtus IV had offered the conversos the possibility of having recourse to the apostolic chamber and the tribunal of the apostolic penitentiary in Rome, being able to plead their causes as true bona fide Christians before both ecclesiastical bodies, a right that they were entitled to as Catholics who claim to be in good standing with the Church. Obtaining favorable sentences from the penitentiary on the part of conversos was a priority for them, because such decisions could clear them of lingering suspicions of apostasy. Examples of prominent individuals who sought out such sentences through procuratores in the wake of the creation of the tribunal are not lacking. Juan Gil cites an example of a petition which was sent to Rome to have the Pope personally intervene in adverse inquisitorial decisions on behalf of some converts from Seville who were still in the Iberian Peninsula, as was their right as members of the Catholic Church at the end of 1481. Among the individuals who took recourse to Rome in the early years of the tribunal's existence to clear their names and those of their relatives of the suspicion of heretical and Judaic practices were important clerics, among whose ranks there were many conversos in the latter part of the 15th century. Equipped with legal arguments and social influence, they tried at times successfully, times not, to prove that they and their family members were true Christians in spite of the blemish of their Jewish past. Two well-known cases were pleaded in the Rome of Alexander VI. Juan Arias Davila, the Bishop of Segovia, went to Rome to defend his converso deceased father's name. After an initial period in which the denunciations against him and his family were collected, the trial began in earnest in 1489. The following year, however, in March 1490, he left Spain for Rome in order to plead his case as befitting someone of his ecclesiastical rank. He was never to return. His case was successfully pleaded before Alexander VI, who subsequently appointed him an aide to the Cardinal of Monreale on his trip to Naples, and he died in Rome in 1497, his prestige and that of his family intact. An altogether different outcome was that reserved for Pedro Aranda, the Bishop of Calahorra, who also tried to clear the name of his deceased father, Gonzalo Alonso. It would seem that Torquemada had begun to investigate his case at the same time as Davila's, father of Davila's. Shortly after his arrival in the Rome of Alexander VI, he gained favor with the papal court, having in August 1493 his father's inquisitorial trial judged by Íñigo Manrique de Lara, the same bishop of Córdoba, who was handed the trial of Juan Davila's father, instead of the judges of the Inquisition in Valladolid. He was named a chamberlain by Alexander VI and sent to Venice as a nuncio, while his son Juan de Aranda was made an apostolic pronotary. This favor, however, was to be short-lived. The governor of Rome and the auditors of the Sacred Palace accused him of secret Jewish practices, of corruption, and of openly expressing heretical opinions, and he was arrested in 1498. He was subsequently tried in July of the same year by a jury which included prominent members of the Curia. Deprived of his ecclesiastical privileges on September 14th of the same year, he was condemned to confinement in Castel Sant'Angelo, where he was to die 2 years later. Both men, in their own way, functioned as procuratores, defending the interests of their families and ultimately their own. As prelates, they could avail themselves of their ecclesiastical dignities to present their cases before papal jurisdiction. A series of more lowly agents operated in a similar way, using the channels of the Curia to present their cases against the sentences of the tribunal. By making the plight of the Spanish conversos a known predicament in Rome, they made this occupy the day-to-day activities of the Roman Curia. Aside from presenting the individual cases, the conversos also attempted to obtain an all-out stay of the tribunal. The foundational period of a fledgling tribunal was marked by constant diplomatic rows between Rome and the Castilian Aragonese courts, sometimes marked by bitter disputes. Some scholars have invoked the presence of a powerful group of conversos in Rome who obtained reversals of papal decisions regarding the tribunals in Spain through the payment of considerable sums of money. Henry Cayman, in particular, cites the example of a bull of Paul IV of August 23rd, 1483, which criticized the brutal functioning of the tribunal in Seville, and which attempted to mitigate its ferocity as a papal pronouncement which had its basis in converso funds. There were similar bulls on the part of his successor, Innocent VIII, who in 1485, on February the 15th and July 15th, objected to the proceedings of the tribunal in Spain, behind which came and saw the efforts of conversos in Rome. These converso strategies for influencing papal policy regarding the Inquisition in Spain not only tried to alter the functioning of the tribunal there, but also made of the conversos an important element of the daily deliberations in Rome, making them a standard reference. Though it is purely speculative, it is at least possible that the Portuguese Cristãos Novos took their cue from the Spanish example several decades before in their dealings with Rome. It could at least have served as a precedent for them in their recourse to the court there. They also followed the twofold strategy of working with individual cases of people accused by the tribunal through procuratores in the papal court and through skillful maneuvering with a view to abrogating the tribunal, or at least mitigating its activity. As is borne out by Herculano's gripping account of the events, they did manage to tip the balance for a time, even obtaining a confirmation of Sempiterno Regi by Paul III in 1535 and a stay of the Inquisition's sentences in 1542, pending the arrival of the papal nuncio who was to study individual cases. Ultimately, these strategies failed, of course, after 1547, and the tribunal would function without papal hindrance, though they did not give up the possibility of somehow altering papal policy. The practice of sending memoriali, accounts of these abuses perpetrated against New Christians in Portugal, was often backed by theological and legal arguments, which were to be circulated amongst members of the Curia, was regular, as in the cases of such documents that surfaced in Rome in 1544. Once again, Ken Stowe mentioned the Concilia. Among the documents that circulated in this memoriale was a copy of this book, and in 1561. If the overall strategy of an all-out abrogation of the tribunal was only partially successful, the sheer quantity of papal briefs which provided the suspension of individual sentences and safe conducts to leave Portugal throughout the 16th century attest to their efforts. On some occasions, the name of the New Christian agent itself appears in the papal documents, which grant the safe conduct or abrogation of a sentence of the tribunal in Portugal. Alongside these measures calculated to allow them to leave Portugal, they were clearly behind the intricate negotiations to create safe havens for New Christians throughout the Italian peninsula through the various invitations made out to them throughout the Italian peninsula during the 16th century. And this has been borne out thoroughly by scholars such as Lucia Fratelli Fischer and Bernard Duff Cooperman. As these and others have shown, the negotiations to have them settled in the port city of Ancona in 1547 and in Tuscany in 1549 were in large part due to the efforts of these agents. We know that in the case of Tuscany, Cosimo de' Medici's invitation was organized and disseminated through a group of such agents based in Rome. Who gave them then their mandate to operate, and what legitimized them in Rome and with the New Christians back in Portugal? This remains unclear, as does how they went about being recognized as one of the procuratores, able to perform their functions in the Curia. The brief of 1535 does not define how they were to be confirmed, nor does it limit their number. In a trial of the governor of Rome against a New Christian merchant, one Diogo Fernandez Neto, who claimed to be in Rome as one of their agents, accused of having written some incriminating letters which indicated that he tried to bribe the papal envoy on his way to Portugal to study the sentences of the tribunal in 1542. During its suspension, Neto claimed that each of them each of the agents confirmed the mandate upon themselves. Called in the trial, the proceedings of the trial, a procurator of the Nazione Lusitane Christianorum Novarum, Neto claimed that each of them was in Rome on their own business, and that the status outlined in the 1535 brief for themselves legitimated their presence in the city while they went about their own affairs. According to the New Christian merchant, it was enough for a member of the Nação to be able to lay claim to be in Rome to represent their collective interests, and each of his fellow procuratores did just that. Neto himself had been sent to Rome by 3 Christian merchants in Portugal who had been sued in the tribunal of the auditor of the Apostolic Chamber by another agent, the cleric and lawyer from Coimbra, Diogo Antonio, claiming that they had owed him some 3,200 ducats on account of his services for years on their behalf in Rome. Diogo Antonio himself had arrived in Rome around 1534, as attested to by a safe conduct made out to him and members of his household. He himself, Diogo Antonio, was one of the many denizens of the Nação who made of Rome a place of residence which served to put new Christians, so to speak, on the map. They became a standard reference, a group to be reckoned with, which could busy some of the finest minds of the Roman Curia at the highest levels. Through the use of procuratores, the Nação managed to gain a recognition and social capital which could place it alongside other national groups which competed for the attention and obtained clout in Rome. Through them, they acquired something paramount to a political status of the Portuguese New Christian, something akin to a political entity. Did these procuratores make up a kind of well-oiled machine which functioned with one heart and mind between Portugal and Rome? Both Herculano and the Roman documents showed that this was hardly the case. Dissension, division, backstabbing, double-crossing were all at the order of the day. Diogo Fernando Neto's trial began as on account of incriminating letters and quickly became a systematic indictment of his tenure as an agent in Rome. Dozens of Roman residents of the Nação took the stand to accuse Neto of being there to handle his own interests and those of his family and not representing them as a whole. Nevertheless, the trial served to further make of them a standard reference, a community, a nazione, parallel to the official Portuguese one, which its church, with a church, hospice, and confraternity dating from the 14th century. Both as a resident group in the city and through the agents which maneuvered in the court, they were able to cast themselves as a separate entity. By tapping into a storied institution which had existed for centuries in the papal court and adapting it to their own needs, the new Christians who opted for functioning as procuratores managed to make of the Nação a standard reference in Rome. By accruing social capital as members of a group which had something akin to national status, they were able to represent themselves as a collectivity with the prestige that belonging to such a group could accord them.